Huh? You're on a mission and you missed it? Well, okay, well, the Yankees won in 6. Yeah, it was okay. I mean, it wasn't nearly as exciting as the National League pennant race, right? Yeah, yeah, Bobby Thompson, huh? How about that? The Giants win the pennant. The Giants win the pennant. Yeah, that was something. Yeah, okay. Okay. Bye. October 21st, 1951. History does not happen in a vacuum, I have often said. Events in one part of the world affect events in other parts of the world every single day. Something happens this week in Kazakhstan that may have repercussions in Korea. This week, the Soviets drop an atomic bomb. I'm Indy Neidell, and this is the Korean War. Last week, the Battle of Heartbreak Ridge ended in the UN forces' favor, though the casualties were alarmingly high. There were some new attacks in the field by U.S. Ninth Corps, and the U.S. First Corps offensive, Operation Commando, was in action all week long. Operation Commando continues this week. Now, back on the 12th, the Chinese abandoned Hill 272, which was occupied by the U.S. 8th Cavalry. This hill is pretty important to controlling the region, though, opening up the eastern approach to what the communists still control, Hill 346, which they have refused to yield. This week on the 15th comes a new UN plan, Operation Polecharge. This sees the Belgian battalion from U.S. 3rd Division reinforcing the 5th Cavalry Regiment. The operation is to take Hill 346 and then push on to the Jamestown line. 8th Cavalry will move in from Hill 272 to assist if necessary. The operation kicks off early the 16th. 5th Cavalry are stopped from getting anywhere by enemy firepower. 8th Cavalry does gain some ground right off, but cannot take 346. For 2 solid days, both regiments try hard with no success. But suddenly, on the 18th, the 1st Battalion from the 5th Cavalry is able to scoot forward and take the hill with little opposition. That same day, 3rd Battalion takes Hill 230. So by the 19th, 1st Cavalry Division has taken all of its commando objectives on the Jamestown line, and the communist forces have withdrawn back to their next line of defense. You know, during Commando, there's been something a bit different going on with the Chinese than other recent operations. They've been super sensitive about advances anywhere near their supply base at Sangyongni. And that doesn't stop when Commando, a pretty big operation, does. The UN forces routinely send out patrols 3 or 4 kilometers forward of the main lines, and to the east, well, that's still a thing. But any probe near Sangyongni causes a seriously strong reaction. During the Commando operation, the Chinese had shown how valuable they considered the control of the terrain in this area. For the first time, they had shifted from the fluid defense system that formed part of their basic tactical doctrine and had dug in depth. The deep bunkers, complex system of trenches, and ammunition stored at the frontline positions showed that they intended to stay and defend in place. Even beyond that, when the cavalry attacked them, they poured in their absolute best reinforcements and fired artillery like it was going out of style to really hold on to their positions, which is totally unlike them so far this year. The losses of manpower have to be enormous before they abandon any position here. Intelligence reports at 1st Corps headquarters pointed out that there seemed to be a definite lack of interest among the Chinese commanders in the fate of frontline regiments, which had been ordered to resist to the end. This suggested that the Chinese might have come around to the belief that fewer troops would be lost through these tactics than in trying to retake lost territory with heavy counterattacks. Well, maybe, but boy, the casualties were really huge for them during Commando. U.S. First Corps estimates enemy losses from October the 3rd to the 19th as possibly as many as 20,000 men, with 3/4 of that caused by 1st Cavalry Division, basically halving the PVA Chinese 47th Army in size. And that is one of the Chinese best armies. And remember too, the losses the North Koreans took at Bloody and Heartbreak Ridges recently. And wow, that is a lot of men that side has lost recently. Of course, the UN side took a bunch of casualties too in Commando, like 4,000 or so, with the cavalry taking nearly 3,000 of that. But they achieved their goals. Their defenses are improved, and the enemy is definitely too off balance to launch any offensives of his own. Remember, though, that there is another UN operation in progress, one similar to 1st Corps' Operation Commando, a 9th Corps attack in the direction of Kum Song that began near the end of last week. Resistance is stubborn, and here too, there is an awful lot of enemy artillery fire to deal with. But day by day, US 24th Division, flanked by ROK, South Korean, 2nd and 6th Divisions, pushes forward, and they reach their objectives the 17th. This impels 9th Corps Commander William Hogue to mount another advance towards Kum Song of about 3 kilometers. There to establish an outpost line and aggressively patrol and maintain contact with the enemy. The advance now goes off about the same as in Phase 1. Steady advances against pretty stiff resistance, but that resistance here seems to be one of delaying actions and not a big effort to hold on to their positions. Chinese attacks come in size up to about battalion level and are mainly night attacks or just before dawn. But already by the 20th, the UN forces have reached their goals and are organizing defenses. They'll send tank patrols forward over the coming days, some as far as Kum Song itself. 8th Army Commander Jim Van Fleet will commend the 2 ROK divisions for excellent service in these actions. If peace talks resume in the near future, these limited offensives the past 2 months will no longer continue as they have, and there may well be another lull in the fighting. Van Fleet is sort of anticipating this by transferring some of his more battered divisions into reserve. For example, US 7th Division, with the attached Ethiopian Battalion from 9th Corps, is swapped with US 2nd Division and the French Battalion, who can now be 9th Corps' reserve. ROK 5th Division goes to the Iraq 1st Corps reserve, while ROK 3rd Division goes over to 10th Corps. There's something else going on I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about now, which I can use an event from October 1st to illustrate. That day, the 24th Infantry Regiment was inactivated, and the 14th Infantry replaced it as one of the 3 regiments of U.S. 25th Division. The thing about that is the 24th Infantry Regiment was an all-black regiment, originally established in the 1860s. It was one of the Buffalo Soldier Regiments, all-black units fighting during peacetime in frontier wars against Native Americans. Why are they being dissolved after all this time? Well, there has been, so far this war, some dissatisfaction with the regiment's performance among some of the divisional officers. The gradual shift in Army integration policies and the exigencies of the battle situation in Korea finally offered a solution. Since World War II, a number of studies had been made on the better utilization of Negro personnel within the Army, and several steps had been taken prior to the outbreak of the Korean conflict. Army regulations issued in January 1950 stated that all manpower would be utilized to obtain maximum efficiency in the Army without regard to race, color, religion, or national origin. These regulations do not actually require units to be integrated, but they allow for it. Then, in March 1950, the U.S. abolished the recruiting quotas, which set a maximum number of black recruits. Also, so far this war, there has been enough enlistment by African Americans that maintaining the all-black units at full strength has not been a problem. And early this year, 8th Army officers began assigning black personnel to understrength white units. This worked great. In fact, their performance in integrated combat units was an improvement. There was no lowering of morale among the white personnel as many feared there would be, nor was there any of the anticipated hostility or big tensions. So back in May, UN Commander Matt Ridgway recommended there be a percentage of black troops in all units in Far East Command to improve the overall effectiveness of his forces, right? A first step towards doing that is eliminating the all-black units, like the 24th Regiment, and the distribution of their personnel among other units. The Department of the Army okayed this July 1st, and then said the integration process will be spread over 6 months and would also eventually include service units. So there you have it. And over the fall, it looks like the 3rd Battalion from 9th Infantry will be distributed among U.S. 2nd Division and the 3rd Battalion of the 15th Infantry within U.S. 3rd Division. Members of the 64th Tank Battalion and 58th Armored Field Artillery Battalion will be sent to white tank and artillery formations, and white personnel from them will swap posts with those men. And there's been developments lately in the war in the skies. As far as planes sent up by the communists goes, August was quiet, but there was a marked increase in September. More planes, and beyond that, more aggressive pilots, roaming fairly far south rather than staying close to safety in Manchuria. The Chinese pilots are really starting to use their Soviet MiG-15s to their advantage. This week, they shoot down 5 B-29s and damage 8 more. Considering the UN forces have only lost 6 in the whole war before this week, that is a pretty good achievement. Now, this happens just before the talks resume, so I don't know whether it's because of that to somehow influence the talks or to show that the communist side is ready or soon ready to seriously challenge the UN for control of the skies. But I'm sure we all look forward to finding out. For now, B-29 daylight bombing missions are called off. Hey, I forgot to mention last week that U.S. President Harry Truman signed the Mutual Security Act back on the 10th. This marks the beginning of a major foreign aid program. This is kind of a replacement for the Marshall Plan and gets rid of the Economic Cooperation Administration, which managed the Marshall Plan, and sets up the Mutual Security Agency to give military, economic, and technical assistance to friendly nations around the world. Congress votes to spend over $7 billion on this, which is a lot less than what Truman wanted. Most of this money is to go to NATO countries at the moment. This week on the 22nd, Greece and Turkey are admitted to NATO. Interestingly enough, of the 14 current NATO nations, 11 have sent personnel to UN command in Korea. However, Italy plans on soon sending a medical unit, and Iceland has no armed forces, so Portugal is really the only NATO country unrepresented. I am sure NATO is happy to have increased its area of responsibility this week, for the Soviet Union conducts their 3rd atomic bomb test this week on the 18th. This is, however, the first time they've actually dropped an atomic bomb from a plane. This is dropped over the Semipalatinsk test site in Kazakhstan and has a yield, reportedly, of 42 kilotons. All 3 of the bombs tested so far, first in August 1949, one last month, those 2 dropped from towers, and now this have been at the same test site. I'm not sure if anyone was actually killed in this last test when the plane dropped the bomb, but I said last week that the communists accused the UN of planes strafing the Kaesong neutral zone in Korea, killing 1 child and wounding another. There's developments on that story this week. The New York Times speculates the incident may have been committed by the communist side themselves, to be blamed on the UN forces. But on the 15th, UN Commander Matt Ridgway says that is not the case, and that yes, on the 12th at 5:30 p.m., 3 jet fighters with American pilots returning from a mission made 2 strafing attacks in the neutral zone, the second one killing the boy and wounding his brother. Peking Radio reports 30 50 caliber machine gun slugs are dug out of the road there. The picture of United States pilots stopping on their way home after a hard day's work to strafe a deserted road with their machine guns and potshot 2 small boys was not one to fill thoughtful Americans with pride. Ridgway promises prompt disciplinary action for this, but there are those who think that is not enough. When a similar thing happened at Kaesong last month, did disciplinary action prevent it from happening again? No, it didn't. And this happened during the day even. There are calls for preventative measures like making the radius around the neutral zone larger than 5 miles, which is small change for a jet fighter. Ridgway has, in fact, called for it to be smaller, so it remains to be seen what, if anything, will come from this. He actually holds one of his rare press conferences on the 16th, but that I will tell you about next week, for this week of the Korean War is over. A week of general success for the UN forces in the field in their small-ish offensives, but a worrisome development for them in the skies. U.S. pledges of foreign aid, mainly to NATO, and the Soviets testing another bomb. These pushing forward offensives by the UN forces from mid-August until now have inflicted very heavy casualties on the Chinese and North Korean forces, as we've seen. UN intelligence estimates suggest that the enemy capability has been reduced and there are no real signs of any enemy offensives in the near future. The raids and probing attacks and all really have neutralized the communist side's ability to mount large-scale attacks at the moment, and the UN obviously has the battlefield initiative. There is the question whether what really are depressingly monotonous attacks will continue in this fashion over the coming months. Just constant jabs to wear down the opposition, but with no knockout blows. The UN forces have made some big mistakes, for sure, particularly in underestimating the enemy's determination, will to resist, and physical defenses, but they are less likely to do that in future. But they also have figured out how to best disperse enemy forces and resources with jab after jab, and taking advantage of the very much inferior enemy communications system. The enemy may still have the propaganda advantage, but it seems pretty certain the UN forces' improved military position can only strengthen the hands of the UN delegates at any peace talks, should such peace talks ever happen again. We shall see. And you shall see it here with me as it unfolds week by week. It is thanks to the Time Ghost Army that I can do this, so be part of this adventure and join the Army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. Linda Day is the Army Member of the Week, and these are the newest commissioned officers. Hey, when we did our Cuba Crisis day-by-day coverage, we did a special episode about Tsar Bomba, a Soviet nuke, and you can check that out right here. Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time. Boom, and camera off.